Hello. I'd like to thank the conference organizers for inviting me to come speak. I am a technologist and I live in the Silicon Valley, and I love talking to people about what's going on, and so I'm very happy to be able to come and speak today about a few recent trends in the Silicon Valley. So our running joke in the Silicon Valley is you meet somebody new and about, 1 in 10 times, so I'm going to build a new app. Okay, that's not so unusual. But then they say, it's going to be a mobile, social, photo sharing app with gamification. And they think this is a new idea, and it always makes me so sad because really you have to build something that's different. But the challenge is that whenever you think you know what's going on, you turn around the next day and you're a little bit surprised because somebody actually manages to build a company that's worth $1 billion that's a mobile, social, photo sharing app. So it goes to explain how difficult predictions are, especially of the future. So what are some anti-trends that are going on, things that are not happening in the Silicon Valley today? So Silicon Valley used to have a lot of startups that would design things that were chips. That's why we're called the Silicon Valley. So people would found new startups to build CPUs and network devices. And the overhead costs for building these chips have been rising over time while Moore's law makes the chips themselves cheaper and cheaper. And so as a result, it is extremely difficult to have a startup that actually builds a chip these days. So my previous startup, which started in 2002, we managed to raise enough money to actually build an ASIC, which was a supercomputing interconnect device, and it is virtually impossible to do that these days, and this makes me very sad. So it is. So what is going on these days on the positive side? So while the cost of building a chip, for example, just even cutting the mask for a semiconductor is ridiculously expensive, many other kinds of hardware are not only becoming cheaper, but the overhead for designing this hardware has shrunk. And this is partly due to the availability of low-cost microprocessors. Part of it is 3D printing, overall rapid prototyping, and then there's a new funding mechanism that people can use that is frequently used for hardware devices, and that is crowdfunding through websites such as KSTAR. So the interesting thing about this new era is it's not like the old era. Traditionally, you would go out and you would try to raise money fairly early on because you had to in order to build the first one of these devices. Instead, many of these startups actually raise VC money after they already have working product, after they already have thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of customers. And this is very different from the way things used to be. I'd like to just tell you about a little device that some of my friends are building. So there's a woman, Jerry Ellsworth, who is incredibly smart, and she has a set of augmented reality glasses called KSTAR. She was originally developing this within a company named Valve, which is a very well-known computer game maker, and Valve decided to go in a different direction, and fortunately they were smart enough to give Jerry the ownership of her project. And so what these glasses are, these are glasses that have projectors just above your eyes to project out into the room, and if you're looking at a special surface that's retro-reflective, it bounces the light back into your eyes. And so several people can sit around a table looking at retroreflective material, and they all see the same 3D images on the table from different angles. These glasses are also very good for not causing motion sickness, because you can still see the room. As you move your head back and forth, it does the right thing. And in general, this looks like a new paradigm that will perhaps be as successful as everyone thinks virtual reality glasses are going to be. And in the lower right of this slide, you can see the prototype device, which they call the head crab. They took this device onto Kickstarter. They raised $1 million. They have received no VC funding to date. And in the upper left, you can see a mock-up of what they believe the final device is going to look like with a couple of folds of the retroreflective material. So there's all kinds of really amazing stuff going on, and probably even none of the speakers today have heard of KSTAR because it's relatively obscure, but still very exciting. So watch out, all those people who are building VR devices. Another thing that's coming along that has a lot of people really excited is the Internet of Things. So I own and drive a Tesla Model S. It is an electric car. It has a 17-inch computer screen on the dashboard, and I can do things with the car, like I can collect information about my driving habits, so I can discover whether or not this week if I appear to be more tense than last week because I'm driving a little bit more frantically. And there's a lot of folks who are building devices like the Nest thermostat and the Lockatron. Both of these were Kickstarter devices originally that are part of the Internet of Things. Another thing that's going on these days is quantified self. This one is a little bit more dangerous area for startups to be playing in because there are very big companies that are engaging in the quantified self market at this point. So for example, Apple in the latest iPhone 5S has a specialized chip called the M7, and its whole purpose in life is to be able to be awake all the time, collecting information about the motion of you and your phone in your pocket. So it can potentially replace the collectors such as a Fitbit that a lot of people wear, which I am wearing here, with something that's just a normal part of your phone. And then other people will come by and write software that will talk to the M7 and tell you things about yourself. Because of this entrant into the market, it might be the case that all the startups which are working on wristbands and other things that collect information might discover that their hardware side is obsolete. But that's the way it is. Sometimes you thought you were going to be a hardware company and you end up being a software company instead. There are trends going on in the software field. A lot of what Silicon Valley does these days is software. And one interesting thing that's been happening recently is that new computer languages are appearing. That's not new. Everyone always likes to invent new computer languages. But these days, other people actually use them. And this is quite different from the good old days when a new language might pop up and become popular every 4th or 5th year. But we seem to be acquiring a couple of new languages, so 2 new languages per year that actually end up getting widely used in production by startups. That's a pretty crazy thing compared to the past, and it's very interesting because it might indicate that the market for software engineers is going to become fragmented, but probably not, because it turns out that engineers are smarter than you think they are, and they're actually capable of learning a lot of different languages, especially if they're fun. A second thing that's going on is that new techniques such as not just agile development, but also continuous deployment are nearly universal among startups. Continuous deployment means that an engineer can make a change to software and it will go out and be deployed perhaps in a few hours, perhaps the same day, and pretty much everyone is doing this. That also makes it very easy to test changes in your software. This is called A/B testing. If you have 2 alternatives, you show one thing to some people and a different thing to other people. You collect some metrics as to whether or not people seem to find this change useful, and then that helps guide the way your product is going to be. By the way, one interesting thing that's wildly different in between big companies and startups these days is that the number of startups that are actually using Microsoft technologies on their servers or Microsoft languages and databases is roughly 0. So it's not that Microsoft makes bad technology, but this is a very interesting trend that among new companies, all of them prefer the frequently open source software that is commonly used among startups today. And probably this will turn around and finish eating the enterprise software market within the next decade or less. Culture in the Silicon Valley is actually really as important as the particular trends in software and hardware that are going on at any point in time. The Silicon Valley has a lot of smart people in a very dense area, and it's hard to go out to a bar without getting into a conversation with other people nearby about something interesting. There's a bunch of ways that this is expressed, not just randomly meeting people. There's the maker movement, which involves people building things. The maker movement is very broad and ranges from children children to adults. There's also a thing called meetups. In the good old days, in 1975, there were a group of people who were interested in building their own microcomputers. This was before you could buy a commercial microcomputer, and called the Homebrew